Hi, this is the first of hopefully several editors working on the same photograph hangout. I'm Ken Thompson. I started this whole mess, so we'll see how it goes. A little bit of background on why I did it. I have watched several critiquing jobs done by various people, but it's always with photos of different people's work. You know, one guy's portrait and somebody else's landscape and somebody else's smoke sculpture or something, which are all wonderful, but you can't really compare them to each other because they're just all different. So I got the bright idea to pass out the same picture to a bunch of people and see what they could do with it. These people before you now have responded to this and done a great job. So basically tonight's experience is going to be to check them out and see what people have to say about each other's and their own pictures. I cut it off at this many people because I've seen a lot of critiques that go on long enough that there's more critiquing to do than time allowed. So I think there's 7 people involved here, and there's 14 or 15 pictures we're going to look at. We'll see how the time goes and adjust. If we do this again, maybe we can have more people involved. So, without a lot of further ado, let me bring up the picture that we started with.
Do you want to do introductions at all?
Oh, you know, that would be a good idea. I should have used a bigger font on my notes. The first picture here is Alan Shapiro. It's his picture that, well, at least the first guy on my list, it's his picture that we're going to be using tonight, and I'm going to be picking his brain quite a bit, too. He is the person who I saw do a lot of these critiques where I got this idea, so I'll blame him for that. Next is Chris Davies, one of the volunteer guinea pigs. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Then Eustace James.
Like a guinea pig.
Oh, you're all guinea pigs tonight. Then there's Eustace James.
Hello.
Me. I'm in the next picture. And Sam Breach, who left work early tonight to be here. I really appreciate that. And Steve DeFeo. And I'm really grateful that your names are all under the picture so I could actually get them all out. So thank you all for being here. And you can see I'm obviously very polished at doing this. I'll figure out what's going on here eventually. All right, I'm going to share.
You should also tell
this.
people where they can ask questions, perhaps.
Okay, yeah. If you guys have questions, anybody who's watching this has questions or comments or anything that they want to say, just leave them in as a comment under this Hangout in Google+, and we'll take turns taking a look at it and see if we can answer some of your questions.
Which is on my post. Maybe what people should do is reshare that it's coming from my post rather than yours.
That is an excellent idea.
Otherwise, people aren't going to know where to look and what's going on.
Yeah, I will. As soon as I can figure out where my browser went, stick a note in there. While I'm doing that, I think I shared the original picture under me. That is the picture. It's Alan's picture. That's the picture we all started with. Alan, you want to talk about it a little bit while I stick a note in here?
Yeah, it was actually, that is the New York Public Library, which is an absolutely magnificent building. For those of you who have been, I mean, it's just endless hallways with coffered ceilings and lots of detail, and the reading rooms are magnificent. It's like being in a Renaissance. Oh,
whoops, that's me, isn't it? Sorry.
that was like a hurricane.
I thought you were being ironic.
Funny keyboard.
I do that every time. I'll mute myself for the moment.
Yeah. So I was actually walking around with Lotus Carroll, who was in New York visiting, and I took her to the library, and she was laying on the ground shooting up at one of the chandeliers, which she's wont to do. She's got this thing for light fixtures and cannolis, which is a deep, dark secret. And I was just wandering around, and I saw this little old man round the corner, and I sort of followed him, and this is the shot. You're not really allowed to use flash, so I didn't have a flash attached. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment shots, and it just really spoke to me. So that's what happened. Anyway, so we lost Cam.
No, I'm back. I was just trying to figure out how to use Google Plus in a hurry. You know, when things go wrong, everything goes wrong.
Absolutely. So I thought this would be an interesting picture to start with, because there's a lot of detail going on in the image, although it's dark to begin with.
There is a lot. Alan gave me two or three options of pictures, and I liked this one best of them because there's so much going on in it. Pardon me for interrupting. So, with that, Alan gave me a few different options of how he'd edited this, and I'm going to, there it went. This is the first one. I'm actually glad that worked. Of all the things going on tonight, the switching pictures is what I figured wouldn't work.
Yeah, that was a nice transition. So I view post-processing maybe different, maybe the same as a lot of people. For me, it's very therapeutic and it's very relaxing. So I will often sit down and do a number of different iterations of an image just to see where it takes me. It's sort of like practicing Photoshop, Lightroom skills, but it's also just a bit of like an improvisation session. You know, there are very few times where I have a very specific way I want to process an image. So in this case, I sat down and I did like 5 or 6, and I think I picked 4 for us to talk about. In this particular instance, I've become very fascinated with sort of trying to recreate older processing techniques. So think of this as like a tintype or just an old silver print that's faded. And again, it's all, let's say, every one of these was done in Lightroom with one exception, just using various sliders and toning controls. So, you know, pretty basic processing on this. So that's the first one.
Alan, did you do anything special in terms of it? Because it looks lighter around the edges. Is there like a little lightness, a little vignette there as well?
Yeah. Instead of going to a traditional darkening of the edges, I've become fascinated with old-time prints, and if you look at them, there's a little bit of fading that goes on around the edges.
Right.
So there's a subtle lightening around it, at least from what the original processed image was. You know, it's clearly a higher key image. There's more detail. It's I guess bordering on HDR. Although I'm not a big fan of HDR, nor do I use any of the like Photomatics tools or anything like that. So this is just a single exposure with a lot of the detail brought back in by moving the shadow sliders all the way to the right. So brightening the shadows and in fact brightening the blacks as well in Lightroom. So it's a fairly simple technique.
It looks good, though. I like that. I'm going to say that
like
a lot tonight.
Newspaper picture.
It kind of does,
like
doesn't it?
Like a faded newspaper from
Yeah.
the 40s or 50s, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to Alan's second picture, or second version, I should say.
And here again, just you know, very simple tonal controls, just shifting more to a higher contrast image. Again, bringing out as much of the detail as I could without going to any HDR techniques. Let's see, what else did I do? You know, I'm not sure if I did it in the first one, but I also was sort of troubled by there's a group of girls sitting against the window in the background. So in this one, and I believe in the last one, I removed them completely.
In the previous one?
Yeah.
Oh, they're still there in the previous one.
Oh, okay. So again, I just came back and decided to take them out. I also, you know, I was thinking about bringing a little of the detail back in that far window, but in this case, I decided I liked the brightness. It's sort of like for me, it's a metaphor for death and dying. You know, as I think about this image, I mean, he's walking into the light. He's got his bag and his cane, and you know, he's a goner. But he's going to a pretty place. We all know that.
Walking into the light, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Alan?
a whole moment. Yeah.
You mentioned tonal contrast. Can you talk a little bit more about how you were sort of working the sliders to achieve that type of an effect? Because despite you saying that you didn't use HDR techniques, this looks like a vastly expanded range.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, thinking about Lightroom, you know, we've got those 4 sliders to work with. So in this case, the blacks I took I blackened, I crushed the blacks. I did open up the shadows, but took the highlights down and then took the whites up. So if you think about like on a levels, it makes a more dramatic S curve as we're doing it. And then I believe what I did is once I had that levels adjustment done, and I play a lot in curves as well within Lightroom, so depending on the image, sometimes the sliders will work, and then sometimes I will go in and I'll want a little bit more of a finer control. Then I also up the contrast a little bit more, and clarity in this case becomes your friend. I mean, the clarity slider is sort of the closest you can get in a standard Lightroom processing to really bringing out a lot of the HDR-like details. The other thing I like to do is I took this all the way up from a sharpness standpoint, down in the details module. But I did do a lot of masking also in that. I don't know. There's a trick. I don't know if you hold down the Option key when you're doing sharpening or noise reduction, and you click on the mask tool, you will see the mask as it emerges. So you can really do a little bit more fine-tuning there rather than going into Photoshop.
Yeah, I just discovered how to show the mask itself, and I can't remember how I did it in Lightroom on Windows, but it's a nice red halo, so I can sort of figure out what I'm doing or what I've done. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And then to answer your question, I think there's also a little bit of an enhanced adjustment using the local adjustment brush in the ceiling and some of the background. So that's how that HDR thing started to come out. I'm not sure what the next image is. Kenny, you still with us?
Yep, I'm here. I'm jumping back and forth to
We actually have a question.
the rest of the group. Oh, well, let's go back.
Gary Monroe said, was there an impulse to give the photo any texture? But I'm not sure if he said that during the first or the second.
I'm sorry, say that. I can barely hear you, Sam.
Was there an impulse to give the photos any textures?
No, not in this case. There was so much texture going on to begin with that for me to add more, even though I like doing it with some of my imagery, it just didn't feel called for here. I'm sure I could have, and it would have enhanced the sort of the old newspaper look that Steve referenced before. You could do that with sort of, with tears and a little bit of folding, but I didn't want to take it too far.
I'm going to start paying a little bit more attention here and less jumping around back and forth to the pictures. So if you guys, to the comments, so if you guys spot those, please break in. So we ready to go to the next one?
Okay.
I like this one.
Yeah, this one, again, it's just pushing it further and further. And for me, there's a lot that happens just in toning. So the techniques are the same. Here, if you think about that curve, the whites and the highlights from a slider standpoint, were pushed even further to the right to brighten them more. And the black slider, rather than going to one extreme, I took it to the other extreme. So it becomes a bit of a higher key image. I did some selective darkening around his pants and his bag and some of the true darker elements, the little signboard that's back there in the middle. But for me, this one versus the first one and even versus the middle one are all more exercises in what toning does to an image and how it can transform it. So I think this is probably my favorite of the three monochrome images. There's something about the quality of the color in this that I really like. So.
Anybody else?
Actually, I have a question. So, when you say toning, can you describe, like in a sentence, what that means to you?
Well, sure. Converting an image from color to black and white is the first step, and you can stop there and then play with the tonality. but then you can also add selective color in a monochrome family, or you can bring back selective color and like have spot full color, which I hate. I think it's gimmicky, so I'm just going to go on record and saying, please don't do that unless you've got a very specific, concept that demands it. But in this case, making an image more sepia color, which is sort of a warmer brown, or a cyanotype, which is blue, or a daguerreotype, which is brown. There are some older, it all originated from trying to recreate the old photographic images of times past based on the chemistry. Now it becomes a creative opportunity. So you can literally tone map an image, so you can define a color for the highlight and the brighter colors, and either a darker color in the same family, so it's a true monochrome image, or you can do what's called split toning, which is where you assign two different colors to an image. One color, like a warm color in the highlights and a cool color in the shadows, and or vice versa. So there's lots of opportunity to play with color in a more limited range. So it's not full color, it's a toned image.
And
Now, go
I have
ahead.
another question related. So would you use the term toning when you were processing a color picture as well as black and white?
Yeah, in fact, I think one of the ones coming up, I did some, this is one where it was a little bit more elaborate, and it's actually 2 layers. So, and you'll see that I pushed one to a warm end and another layer to a cool end and then married them together. So you can do toning to a full color image or a black and white image. If we're talking about Lightroom, you just go to the toning module. If you're doing it in Photoshop, there are any number of ways of doing it, from adjustment layers over a black and white or a color image, or literally going to sort of the gradient map, which is one of my favorite tools because you get a more extreme range of colors and have a little bit more control. So, I think that's almost like a whole separate tutorial that, I may get around to doing one of these days. Because there's like 5 or 6 different techniques that I use to apply tones to an image.
I think I probably do it too. I never think to call it toning either.
Yeah.
It's just,
And you think about it, you can apply 3 tones and 4 tones. I mean, I think it's tougher to do in Lightroom without bringing it into Photoshop. But one of the more interesting exercises would be to sort of like literally create 5 different iterations of an image and then combine them using different tones to define different areas of it.
that's actually what I do in Photoshop.
Yeah. So it can be very effective, as you know.
One of the things I considered when I was trying to put this whole concept together was just doing a few pictures and then having people pick one or come up somehow with one person to demonstrate how they did it. I think that might take a little bit too long, but that would be interesting.
Yeah, something to consider. I mean, whether it becomes a tutorial kind of thing, or whether it's just like literally here's how it works, and you can quickly cycle through some things.
Yeah, that might be something to consider for the future, because just hearing you talk about it is fascinating. But watching you do it, or you or anyone do it, would be great.
Yeah.
I learned almost everything I know about Photoshop by watching Hangouts and people do the stuff on hand. It's amazing how much you can pick up if you just pay attention and watch these things.
Absolutely. I'm totally there with you. I've had the benefit of having worked with Photoshop since day one, but it's really all about watching people and picking up all the different techniques that you can, because especially in Photoshop, you can do everything at least 3 or 4 different ways, and usually lots more ways.
And you can read all the books there are too, but people come up with ways that the people writing the software didn't think of, or some twist on things that if you see somebody do, that's a great learning tool.
Absolutely.
We go on to number 4 here.
Yeah, so here's one I think where you can clearly see, and I pushed it more than I normally would, and it looks even different on Google than it does on my screen. But this is actually 2 layers. They're both full color, but I pushed one toward the warmer scale, and literally this is just playing with the temperature control. in Lightroom. So I tried to keep these techniques fairly simple so that if people were watching, they could sort of do this at home. So I created I created a virtual copy and the original. The virtual copy I pushed toward the blue, and the original I pushed toward the warmer, oranger tones. And then I took each of those two layers into Photoshop in a single document, which is sort of, you go edit photo, merge to layers or whatever that specific command is. And then I literally just did a simple gradient mask to mask out the center, revealing the blue. And, you see what's possible. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. It's just, showing different ways of processing images. So this is like a 10-minute technique, whereas the first couple were like 5-minute techniques.
It's something that's neat about the way you did this, is it's the opposite of what, if I wanted to make it look right, it's like the opposite of what I would do. If I was going to do it and I wanted everything to look natural, I would have cooled down the interior and warmed up the exterior light, and you did a flip on it, and you exaggerated those color temperature differences, and it makes gives it a neat two-tone. It's not what you see when you're watching, when you're looking there, when you're in person. It gives it a neat
absolutely, and that's the fun of it, right? I mean, there's a whole school that says you try and recreate what the camera sees, and I hate those people. No, I don't hate them. I feel sorry for them because they're sort of a little too limited in their thinking. Because we're artists, right? And we should be able to play and experiment and push things. And so in this case, it's a more cinematic kind of approach. It's got a little bit more drama. There's a very hard and deep vignetting to the outside. But again, pretty simple. It's just playing around and seeing what works. And I think, to your point, Steve, I started where the outside was warm and the inside was cool. And it's like, well, why, right? And I just reversed it and liked it way better.
Yep.
And I don't know if the girls are still in the back. And then let's go to the last one, and then we can move on. Because in the last one, I just, now it's like, let's have some fun. So I guess I got tired of the guy walking down, and I started to feel sorry for him. So I decided to sort of do my version of being there. I don't know if anyone remembers that movie with Peter Sellers. My favorite is at the very end where he sort of just takes his long walk and ends up walking on the lake, and it's sort of a magical moment. So in this case, a little stupid retouching. I didn't spend too much time doing it, but I just lifted him off the background, cloned in where he was standing, added a new drop shadow, and just had him do like a little step kick up in the air.
I love it when you say this is just a 5-minute job. It's like that's really impressive.
Well, yeah, remember I've been working with Photoshop since it first came out, so
you've got a little experience on your belt.
Yeah, I have. And it's not perfect by any means. And had I had more time, I would have. I think I could have played around. But it's literally just working with him, silhouetting him, doing a very careful cloning of the background. There's some mirror imaging that allowed me to do it. I mean, I could show you the original layer where he is totally gone, and I just very carefully mirrored the image to some degree, and then tried to make the shadows work because the reflection is a little bit off center, so it wasn't as easy as it would seem. But with patience, you can do anything. So I would say this was like a 20-minute project, start to finish. So.
We'll have to work one of those in. I'd love to watch you do that for 20 minutes, or even a sped up thing, just to see the pieces.
Yeah, think about it. It's, you just bring it in, you process it, you create a duplicate layer, and mask all but him away, and so he's carefully silhouetted, and there's a whole skill set in working with the refine edge tool and all of those. But again, those are more specific lessons for folks. And then just playing with his legs and bending them and redrawing them, and so whatever.
Just having fun with it, right?
Yeah, kind of just playing around. which, you know, I can't wait till we get to talk about Sam's, because, you know, talk about ultimate playing around. So.
Well, first I'm going to put you guys through mine. I'm a rank amateur at editing. I mean, I can do certain things, but I haven't got anywhere near the experience that any of you guys do. So basically, I just sat down with my software and started playing with this. At first, I was just trying to work with the back window and bring things out, which I kind of did, but it wasn't very exciting. It didn't really do anything for the whole image. So I decided to make it a night shot. And I know that there's technical problems with this that I don't have the chops to fix yet. But and in fact, I started not to put this picture up, but I thought, I'm gonna put one up and stand up for the guys who aren't very good at this yet. I'll be one of you. I'll represent you. But for instance, the purple around his head and kind of around the image of the guy, I tried to fix that, but I wasn't very successful at it. But all in all, I thought darkening everything and trying to make it kind of look like a night shot wasn't too horrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, what did you do?
I just used a color changer and set the temperance up fairly high.
Were you in Photoshop or Lightroom?
No, this was in PaintShop Pro.
Oh, okay.
I don't. Getting Lightroom and Photoshop is on my list, but it's not at the top of my list yet.
Okay.
But watching you guys work with it, it's something I need to do, but I'm just not there yet. So I used the software that I had, and just kind of played with it for a while. But I changed, to finish answering your question, I changed all of the sunlight, the white areas coming from the window and on the walls, I just changed those all to black. And looking at it now, there's some areas that are kind of just dull. I guess there was no reflection in that spot, but I threw it up here anyway.
It's art, and there's no right or wrong.
My son liked it, which stunned me, so I have a 17-year-old, doesn't like anything, but he said this wasn't bad, so it can't be all bad.
17-year-olds always like dark things, right?
That's true. Maybe that was it.
They're going through their dark thing.
Maybe he thought that was a vampire and going after the girls at the end.
Possibly.
I was about ready to say the same thing about vampires.
That's all I know about 17-year-olds.
In that case, that's what I meant, but... Anyway, next is Sam's. I changed the order a little from what I originally was going to do. I moved Sam's up to here, and I really like this picture.
Yeah. So is this post-processing, or is this just...
It's art.
This is art, right?
It is art.
I actually have my Photoshop file if you wanted to see it, but I'll just explain my thinking a bit first. So actually, Alan, I was actually surprised that was a guy, because I thought it was a woman when I was doing it. Anyway, first of all, I decided I wanted to remove everything from the hallway, and practicing a sort of inside-outside underwater shot was one of those things that I'd seen somewhere, and I wanted to try it myself. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to do that. And I first of all tried with the image the right way up, but because of the perspective, there wasn't enough space under the water in order to do that. So then I had the idea of flipping the image. And once I flipped the image, when I saw the lights, they reminded me of jellyfish. Mm-hmm. So then that became the sort of central idea for my shot, that I would have this sort of water tank. And these lights, I'd remove them, but then I bring them back into the image as the jellyfish. So everything that I used in this image was shot by me. It's all from my archives. So I had some water. The water surface is actually, this is just taken in a fountain from a Google Plus photo walk at San Francisco Zoo. The jellyfish is from the San Francisco Science Museum, where they have an aquarium. I just got some of the tentacles. The girl that you see here, she was actually one of my models for my May scavenger hunt for the balloon shots. Mm-hmm. So this was actually one of her jumping with the balloons. I was trying to get her look like she was floating in the air for that. So I was able to use that, and her hair was just felt like it was the right kind of thing for underwater, also her dress. So then What I think, the way I work is usually when I'm doing a composited image, is that I treat it like a sketch. So I do it really, really quickly, where I do really, really rough mattes. Instead of I don't sort of spend ages painting something if I don't know that I need to do that yet. So I do it really roughly, and then I go back afterwards and maybe clean things up. I mean, this is a pretty dirty composite, and I fix some things and then I break some other things. So now I see there's something I broke on my last edit, which is this line just under the water surface, which is a bit darker. Mm-hmm. There's things that I notice are wrong, like I tried to make the water go into that gap on the left-hand side, but now I realize it should be shadowed, so I should have darkened that. The only thing I didn't really create myself here is well, apart from Alan's image, of course, that I started with, is the brush in the background with the flare. That's a Photoshop brush that I downloaded for free. There's a website called obsidiandawn.com, and he has some great free brushes, and this is a flare brush of his that I used. So everything else pretty much mine or Alan's.
So I saw this and I started like laughing with glee. I was so happy to see this. I love everything about it, and for me what's staggering is just how effective it works upside down. Like the ceiling becomes almost like an underwater carpeting, which for me makes perfect sense. Like, of course there's like an oriental rug in this wonderful aquarium. Of course, it's got to be, because look at the jellyfish that are swimming around. So I think you did a fabulous job, Sam. I love this.
I do too. I looked at this initially and I thought it was a great shot, and then I went back to go see where it was you got the bottom of the frame from. That wasn't until then I realized it was flipped upside down. Yeah. I think it's just marvelous. The whole thing is great. And the nitpicky things that you're coming up with that you did wrong, they look fine.
Yeah, here's the thing, until we start poking around and, I would have done this differently, no one else is ever going to notice.
Exactly.
Well, my background, I used to be a visual effects artist, and I spent a lot of time paying attention to detail. So I kind of embarrassed myself because, that was my job, so I did it all day long. But now photography is a hobby, so I don't have the time to do it as I would have to do it professionally. I mean, we would spend weeks just working on one shot for a movie that was 4 seconds long or something. So these things kind of niggle me, because first of all I usually don't notice them, and then I come back to the image and I'm like, oh, I forgot that, or I forgot this, or I forgot the other thing. And I noticed actually Gary's asked me a question: is everything you're doing with masks, or do you copy pieces into their own layers? Well, the answer is both. I have a lot of layers and a lot of masks. I don't erase stuff from a layer. I just use masks for everything. It's just brilliant. Since I worked that one out. And also, from what Alan was saying earlier, I recently did a class and I had a light bulb moment, which was you can open an image as raw, as a smart layer inside Photoshop directly from Lightroom. Mm-hmm. And then you can duplicate it, and then you can treat each one differently and have masks on them so that you're pulling in different colors, but you're not having any, it's completely lossless. You haven't lost any quality by doing that. You haven't merged anything down, you haven't compressed anything. Everything is still in its raw state.
Right. And just for people, just a little technical we should teach, I guess. If you go under Photo and then Edit In, you can edit in Photoshop or whatever other image processing programs you have connected. This is in Lightroom. But then if you go towards the bottom, you can open as a smart object in Photoshop. And so that's what Sam's talking about, and that allows you to then make ongoing changes. So it's a very efficient, and I would highly recommend that that's how people get in the habit of doing something very, and they know exactly what they're doing. I always work with smart objects when I'm doing compositing like this, because you never, it gives you the opportunity to go back and warm things up or up the exposure. And especially if you're working with multiple layers like Sam was, you can then start copying, creating a smart object as a copy rather than as a duplicate. And then each one is treated separately. And then you can start masking them together.
And then you have like a 3 gigabyte.
It's just disk space.
I sometimes get
memory as well.
Well, that too.
You got to have lots of memory.
But then when you're done, when you're really done, then you can rasterize the smart object, and you can The other thing, if you're really concerned about disk space, I don't know, most people and all the new Photoshop and Lightrooms are working with 16-bit images, which gives you just a far broader range of pixels to affect. But you can easily cut your image in half by just reducing it to an 8-bit image. So if you're really, wanting to play around with effects and you're not going to print it out to an overly large size, just downsize it to an 8-bit image. And it will literally be half the size that you're working with.
Another good tip. All right, I'm going to move on to the next picture now.
So wait, before we go, Sam, how many layers did you end up working with? Ballpark.
At least 20, maybe 30.
Wow.
I don't know. A lot. I do a lot. It's the way I work. And I do it very, very roughly to begin with, and then I go back and clean it up.
Right. And so that brush layer that you added, is that, the flare behind the girl that sort of defines the whole background space, is that its own layer, and is that sort of set to a, are you working with different blending modes? Again,
Yeah, I work with different blending modes. I kind of know which group I need to go into. I can't always think I must use the blob. Some of them I'm really familiar with, like screen and stuff like that, but sometimes it's trial and error. Mm-hmm. And another thing I should point out that I did, so the girl, which you might find interesting, she's masked out, and I have different masks for her underwater and above the water. Mm-hmm. And I did an internal glow, so that it looks like the light behind her is wrapping around her slightly. So this makes her look as if she's really in the scene instead of being cut out.
Yeah, she's bathed in the light. It's a great, great little trick there. Okay.
Okay, now I'll move. This one is Eustace's. Excuse me.
Look at that. That's mine. I actually, when I started looking at this, I wasn't going to make it a black and white. I was going to take it to about 30% saturation and leave some of the color in. But as I played with it a little more, I felt that it would probably be more, or have more impact as a high contrast black and white. And a lot of the things that Alan was talking about when he was talking about his black and white treatments are things that I went with as well. The things that I did differently, if you look at the window, I mean, the whole concept of walking through a tunnel or walking to a bright light is something that I like to play with quite a bit. And I like to go out and I find silhouettes and I find places to put people in front of really, really bright backlights. So I looked at this image and I said, thanks, Alan, right away, because, that kind of thing is right up my alley. So if you look at the back window, I'm a big fan of that local adjustment brush. Mm-hmm. And I used exposure, and I just brightened the exposure locally there. Mm-hmm. For the man himself, to make him more of a silhouette, I did the opposite. I darkened the exposure, just went in carefully to 1-to-1 ratio and just darkened him. And again, the same thing with the girls on the bench. I didn't really want to take them out. And you know what? I can't really tell you why I made that decision, but I wanted to leave them there. So instead of taking them out completely, again, it was just a little local adjustment where I darkened the exposure on that bench and just above the floor, so it looks a little bit more of a contrast with the window itself. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of other things I did was with the light globes, I wanted them to glow more. I didn't really want to see individual lamps in there, so I went in there and did a local luminance adjustment, and that sort of caused it to fill the bottom of the lamp. Mm-hmm. And then there's a subtle split tone in there. I'm sure you can't really tell, but the white light is slightly blue, and the walls are slightly sort of sepia or brown, which is exactly the same thing that you did, Alan.
Yep.
A little bit unnatural, but
totally,
exactly the
but a
same.
totally different effect, right? I mean, just amazing how these subtle changes can dramatically transform an image.
Yeah, and it's just tiny. It's like 10-12% on each slider, but it makes a huge difference when you look at a straight up black and white and when you look at that split toning. And the other things I did, bumped the blacks, did a little bit of a vignette, and I don't think I did anything with the shadows, but I cranked the highlights up because I wanted that high contrast look. So I think I went a little bit further than one or two of yours, but I mean it's a similar sort of idea. It's just a bit of a variation.
Yep. You know what I would want you to look at where those girls are on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it's such a strong, high contrast image, but I start to lose him a little bit where that far bench is, and then also on the space between his leg and his little wheelie bag.
Yeah.
I would like brighten that a little, just so you really pull him out.
Yeah. That was one of the things I thought about, and I started to play with that a little bit, and it started to look a little on the unnatural side. And I wanted to be as subtle as I could with that, but it just wasn't working. I tried it 3 or 4 different ways and different times. It just wasn't working for me. And the other thing, as you mentioned, the girls, is that I considered taking them out completely and cloning that window right down to the floor.
Oh, that would have been neat.
Yeah. So that's maybe something that I will take back and work on a little bit more and see what I can do with it.
Huh. That would be a great. I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Right.
Interesting. Give him a little bit more background or more light behind him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So did you do this all in Lightroom, or?
This is all Lightroom. I didn't take it into Photoshop at all. But in order to do the cloning properly, I'd be much more comfortable in Photoshop for the bench and the girls in the back. Mm-hmm. As far as the shadow in between the man and his suitcase, that's easily done in Lightroom, and that's the adjustment brush again, which I love.
Yeah.
I've never used that adjustment brush. I've never went there yet.
Really? Okay. You got to. And one of the things that you should know is that also has an auto masking feature in Lightroom. So when you click on the brush, there's a little checkbox that lets you, let me get into it, I'll be very specific. It's towards the bottom, right above the density slider, which is the very bottom one. It's called auto mask. And what it does is it, like the smart adjustment layers in Photoshop, it will look for areas of higher contrast, and it will automatically mask for you. So it's not perfect, but in a case like this, it will allow you to lighten the shadow without bleeding into his pant leg.
Okay.
So just, a little thing to be aware of.
I'll have to play with that.
Yeah, exactly. I hadn't played with that function.
Right.
I'm sort of afraid of that button.
Again, it doesn't always work, but if you start there, and if you start at the other thing is, don't always keep your brush at 100%. Start much subtler. Most of the time when I'm doing this, I'll start at like 20 or 30% and brush in an effect very subtly.
Right, and the other thing that I found is that the wheel controls the size of your mouse or your brush head.
Yeah.
So if you've got a mouse with a wheel, you can use it to just sort of be very, very careful about what you're doing and how much your brush affects, and the edge softness has a great deal of effect on where your brush is going to go. There are all kinds of little things like that.
Yeah. Of course, you really should, put a graphics tablet with a stylus on your wish list eventually. Because if you find yourself doing a lot of painting, there's nothing like that sort of natural media feel that you get from a stylus and a tablet.
Well, it's direct hand-eye, too. You don't have a mouse in between, so you could, well, if you have hand-eye coordination, not like I.
Yeah.
So you're saying when you move the mouse wheel, the brush changes sizes, and you can do that on the fly?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Up and down.
Right. You also have your bracket and, I guess it's bracket and parentheses keys? No, it's the bracket keys. that allow you to, left bracket increases your brush size, right bracket decreases your brush size. So, things that people tend to forget. You can, as Eustace was just saying, you can control the hardness and softness or the feathering of the brush. You can control the overall density of the brush. So it's almost like, you're painting very lightly with a wash versus you're painting with solid, whatever that effect is. So it's just for people to play.
That's a good tip.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move on to Stephen DeFeo's cyan version.
Ooh.
All right. Yeah, this is the first one I was playing around with on it. I come from originally a film background. I actually went to school for photography before digital was viable, so I have darkroom time and experience. And one of the things that I used to do was I always used warm black and white paper. So the paper itself was always a little bit sepia, a little bit warmer than white. And then when you did you would do, selenium toning or do a cyanotypes, you'd get this blue cast in the shadows on where the silver landed. So when I do a black and white like this, and this one I want, clearly I darkened it down. There was a lot of vignetting here. Kind of wanted it to look like almost candlelight, like it's the end of the day, and he was on his way out, and so it really dark inside. But I was really concerned with the tone, so what I did was a duotone. I work in Photoshop. I use Lightroom 3, so I don't have the developing controls that Lightroom 4 has. So I have identical controls in the raw engine in Photoshop in CS6. So I did the duotone there, and I just made the shadows go towards blue, cyan, and brought the highlights to kind of a yellowish brown. And with the highlights, they're not very saturated, so that there may be a 20% or less saturation. The blue is a little bit more blue, but I was trying to go for a feel of a print like I would have made 15 years ago in the darkroom, and that's that was my idea with this one.
Love the toning. Also, did you soften it a little bit or take the clarity down, or?
Yeah, you caught me. Yeah, you watch a lot of stuff, a lot of tutorials, and everybody is knocking that clarity all the way up, just bumping it up. Mm-hmm. And I got into that trend, and then just recently I started knocking it down, and I love the look that it gets because you don't lose detail really or sharpness, but it gives you kind of a glow instead of those hard edges on your grain and your detail. So instead of being grungy, it was kind of an ethereal feel.
Now, are you like an adjustment layer, soft light blending mode kind of guy to get this, or what's your tip?
You know what? I don't think this ever got into Photoshop except to save it. I think everything was done in.
So this is Lightroom. So this is reverse clarity.
In RAW. This is all in the RAW engine. There was no layers involved in this. This was all. I made it a grayscale. I played around with the grayscale on the tones, and then I did a duotone to get those shadows blue, and the highlights like that sepia tone. There's some adjustment brush work on the ceiling. I kind of wanted some of the glare from outside to disappear off, like I would say the half of the hallway that's closest to us. I wanted to get rid of the glare there altogether, and just put that source of light at the end of the hallway. It's all in the raw engine.
Yeah. It's amazing just looking at all of the iterations. I mean, like even just how many of us went into a monochrome family, and yet how different they all are. I mean, from Eustace's very dramatic, strong black and white, very theatrical, to this, which is just magnificent in its subtlety and softness, right? It's a totally different thing, and it's literally just moving a slider from one extreme to another in a slightly oversimplified way.
Yeah.
If
I recommend anything to anybody, is just don't be afraid to move those sliders back and forth and test all of them if you're starting out and you're not confident with these controls. Just mess with them, because if you only brighten shadows and knock down highlights and do HDR and move that clarity all the way to the right, then you're only ever going to get one feel, and you won't really know what you've got. And it's if you're not learning something in Photoshop on a daily basis, then you're missing something, because there's just so much there.
Your whole reasoning there was it pretty much sums up why I wanted to do this in the first place. I suspected there'd be a lot of monochrome images come out of this, but they are all different, and I think that's just great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing I would add to Steve's point is that if you find something that you like, save it as a preset, and that's a starting point for even more exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as long as it's not too early in the process, I'm there with you. Totally use this. I just find a lot of people who are beginners rely on the presets as opposed to that are given, as opposed to developing their own.
Right, and that's very true.
Yeah,
that was one of the points I heard Alan make the last time I saw him on something, was learn how to do it first, then use the presets, which I think is a great idea.
And see, I was one of those people who liked presets, but I find that it's much more satisfying a lot of the time, because the presets don't really, in a lot of cases, fit the idea of where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, they're good starting points. I just see far too many people, not in this group, clearly, but far too many people just saying, oh, I like that, and being done with it. And to Steve's point, not playing around and seeing how much further you can go to one extreme or the other. That's why I talk about, processing as like sketching. Do 4 very different ones just as an exercise, just to force yourself to get away from the same old, and then come back and decide which one you love, and spend 2 minutes. A friend of mine, Barry Blanchard, who does a lot of landscape work, he doesn't process for more than the length of a song. That's his rule, because he's got a little ADD thing going on, and he's older, and there's not a lot of time left. He's probably watching, so I can kid him. But that's his thing. So you listen to a couple of songs, you do a few iterations, and then you come back and then you fine tune. But at least explore and see what's possible.
And in Lightroom, a lot of people don't know, at least I didn't know this for a long time, but there's actually, when you're in the develop mode, on the left, there's a thing called snapshots.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little plus sign next to it. So whilst you're working, you can just, at any time, just plus, and you'll save a snapshot of what you're working at that very moment in time. And then you can go on playing. And if you mess everything up, you can just go and retrieve the snapshot for the last time that you liked it.
Yep.
Huh.
Absolutely.
Is that in the raw engine that Photoshop has also? Do you guys know?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think that's a Lightroom thing.
Where exactly is that, Sam?
It's in develop mode on the
Right.
left-hand side above history. There's a little snapshots bar.
Oh, right.
Plus sign.
And all this time I've been... Yeah, I see that, and all this time I've been ignoring it.
I didn't know about it for like 3 years, but I've known it for about 6 months now. It's very useful.
That's amazing.
Yet another invaluable tip brought forth from this endeavor.
There you go.
I'm going to move on to the next one, because just in the interest of time here. I like this one.
Okay.
This one is it's like, where'd it go? Go ahead.
When we agreed to, you came up with this idea, Ken, for doing this, and then you put out this picture, and I had all these grandiose ideas of doing manipulation, but if I want to manipulate something, I try to shoot clean things, and without being a critique on the photograph, this was a pain in the butt. This photograph was not easy to do that with, because of all the detail, the grain in the floor, and just the way the guy was cutting off where things were. It was a real bear, but just, this was actually a lot quicker than I thought it was going to be. What I did with this one is I just used the patch tool. This was in CS6. I didn't do a lot with the developing. I just wanted to mess around with the getting rid of the guy. What I did was I used the patch tool and I just dragged him around, and I wasn't worried about getting that floor perfect. I just wanted to keep some of the grain of the wood flooring and the detail. So I used the patch tool and dragged him around and let it fill in with that basic wood grain floor panel. And you see those, if you look at the picture, if you look at the windows, the 3 panels behind the kids that were seated there, the one on the left, you have half a panel there. I actually cut that out and made a layer, made actually 5 layers, and 2 of them were the left half of the boxes of the second and third box, and then I flipped horizontal and made them the right side of the boxes. So I actually created those 2 squares where the other kids were sitting out of just the left half of that left square at the bottom panel of the window. And I just did that, and I got rid of the kids that you could only see their heads and their feet. And then because it was so messy, and I really wanted to enhance that reflection, I just did I created another layer of the window and flipped it vertical, used the lighten mode, and then I just distorted it so it fit to the angle of the reflection all the way over to the bottom of that trim on the floorboards there. And I surprised myself in how effectively it got rid of the guy, because that guy was driving me nuts.
I think that's an interesting perspective, is what drew me to this picture was all the detail. So that's cool.
It's just
there's lots of stuff in here to play with.
Cutting stuff out.
Well, yeah.
Just mostly because the guy was so big and cut off almost everything that you would use to clone to replace him. I found it very challenging because I'm not great with that kind of detail work. But
I don't see any reflections or shadows or anything of him left over.
No, he's gone.
So you did a good job.
Yeah, this is a great, this is another one of those where I started clapping my hands. It's like, oh my God, look at that. I mean, because it was a bear. And, that was one of the reasons I sort of volunteered this image, because it was, there was so much to work with and so much to deal with. But you did it. You did it really well.
Yes, you did.
I liked especially how I just left the one person at the end of the hallway.
Yeah.
Because the picture was such a lonely picture of that one guy walking down the hallway. I wanted it to be a lonely picture of that girl.
Yep.
So I could get rid of her friends.
Excellent job.
Well done. Now, what made you crop it horizontally?
It was, in the process of doing it, it was a conscious thing. I didn't want to deal with that top light, with the distraction of the top light, and I actually originally was going to widen the hallway. I actually was going to put a second window and make it almost a grand hallway. And it just was so tough that it just evolved. It was me messing with it, trying to change the perspective and the size of this hallway and the content of the hallway. And that's where I rested when I figured out how to get rid of the guy. So I just kept going.
Yeah. I just think it's fascinating, and it's one of those stupid things that people always forget, is that simply by changing the way an image is cropped, you can dramatically change the look and feel of an image. So it's one of the first things I tend to play with if I'm working with an image where it's like something's bothering me. Again, I will just cycle through all of the different horizontal, vertical, looking squares and extreme close-ups and things.
When you're cropping something like this, do you worry about the aspect ratio, whether it's direct something that can print on a common size, or do you just go with what looks good? I mean, do you think about that when you're cropping? Anybody?
I'm pretty much a purist. I try and keep my aspect ratio the same as
I don't. For me, I do it on feel. I generally assume the beauty of the internet is, and Google Plus and Facebook is, it's rarely looked at full screen. There's always some sort of artificial border around your picture. So if you're off, I knew I wasn't going to print this because I was never going to get the detail good enough. So I didn't need it to fit in any other ratio. So I just wanted it to go with how I like the look. And if I'm going to print, then I kind of change that, crop it differently.
And
usually I'm a 3x2.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Usually I'm a 3x2 guy because that's the way my camera frames it. So that's the way I've learned to think. So 3 on the long end, 2 on the short, and I occasionally work in square because sometimes things just have to be square. But 3x2 is my go-to.
Okay.
I tend to agree with you on that.
I'm an anti-purist. I sort of the rule of thirds. I believe in the rule of 7/16 and 18/32. I mean, because in this day and age, we have so much flexibility, and we're not even limited to a certain size paper anymore like we used to be, because everything comes in rolls now. So we can do whatever we want, and it's easy enough to cut a mask that is custom, or even create a custom frame. So why be limited?
That's why they make saws, so you can make any size frame you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why they have them over at Michael's.
I love breaking all the other rules, but I don't know why that one just seems to.
I came from. One of you mentioned before coming from a print background. That's where I got my start too with paper, and it was 8x10. Period. So I have tried to break that habit, and a lot of times online, 8x10 or that square, that shape doesn't work. But I wondered if it was just me.
I mean, think about like TVs and how they've evolved, and even our computer screens. I mean, now we're going into widescreen and ultra widescreen format, and non-traditional, but I guess it really depends on what we're optimizing our images for. Are we doing it for a specific, like if you're making a book, I've been working on a number of books simultaneously, and I've sort of given up hope that I'm ever going to finish them because I have perfection paralysis. But that is the one place where, I'm sort of limited by the size of the book, but even then, it's like how the image sits in that bigger proportion. There's so much play to be had and to be looked at that
you're not locked into edge to edge or anything.
No, God, right. Why? I mean, and even if you are, you can still crop in so that if it's a full bleed image, but you've got. That's the benefit of having digital film and cameras that are capturing more and more megapixels worth of data. Is you can zoom in to, a much greater degree than we ever could before.
A lot of my cropping is cropping out stuff rather than cropping in stuff. There's things in the picture that I don't want, so I kind of crop around. I mean, I usually try to keep the same aspect ratio, but it rarely works out that way. So, that's where I do my cropping. Is there's things in the picture I don't want. So, I work that way with it.
Okay, we've got 4 pictures left, and we're already hit about the hour mark, so I'm going to move on. This is Steve's last. Solo HDR, he calls it.
Yeah, this one, I just wanted to play around with this one, because I do sometimes do HDR. When I shoot landscape, I almost always shoot bracketed. I've been doing that since I shot slides, and sometimes you just need it. You need that HDR merge in Photoshop or Lightroom to get that range that you want. I decided to push it as far as to push it. What I did was I took your raw image into RAW, and I touched nothing except the exposure, and I dropped it down 2 stops, and I brought it into Photoshop and created a TIFF. went back into RAW with the original one, knocked it up 2 stops. Then eventually I had 3 TIFFs at 2-stop differentials, and then I used the merge to HDR in Photoshop and created that, and then created the TIFF, and then opened it back up in the RAW engine and played with it. This was more of an exercise for me to see. It's the first time I've ever done it. It actually, the thought just popped into my head because there was so much grain, and I would have loved to have had a bracketed shot with this to play with that detail. So I just faked it and pushed it. That's, you know, I wish I had taken the time to get rid of the noise in between, but on the darker parts. But
I think it was Alan mentioned before. Was it you that said you're anti-HDR by default? Somebody mentioned it.
Yeah, that was probably me, and
I've known a lot of people like that. They just detest the letters even. And I've seen a lot of HDR pictures that looked over-processed. They don't look. I mean, they're just different than what I like. This isn't. I like this one.
Well, this isn't way over-processed like a lot of them. I mean, this is someone who knows how to work with a tool and use it, rather than someone who is just taking a tool and turning it all up to high, going crazy, right? So there's the difference.
And see, the thing with a lot of HDR is not necessarily the expanded range, but what's called tone mapping.
Yeah.
That changes the way the tones appear in the image. And I think that's the thing about HDR, or most HDR, that I object to. But something where you're just sort of opening up some shadows and you know, trying to get the highlights down so that you can see, that's a different thing to me.
Yeah.
And that's what I used to convince a friend of mine to try it. You don't have to go nuts with it. Just use it to try to bring out different parts of the picture. And he tried it and was no longer objecting to it.
You know, one of the things that I want to keep emphasizing, you know, because it's important to me, and I think Steve did it really, really well. If you look at his first image, that very soft, very, you know, traditional film image, and then you jump to this image, you know, you see such a tremendous range, and that's what this exercise is about. It's about, you know, the possibilities that are there within every single image, just about, and it's up to us to look and to pull out certain things based on how we're feeling and what we want to evoke in our viewers, and, you know, what an image evokes in us. So if you just look at the extremes there, you know, if you were to put them side by side, it's magnificent in its scope, in the range, and that's what's possible. And that's what people should be experimenting with, just so that they can understand how these tools can be worked with.
And tools is a good word. Anything you can do in here is just a tool. It can be used for good or evil.
Yeah. With HDR, not to get into a big old thing about HDR, but when I shot film, I shot a lot of black and white film, and I used to drop the ISO and push the processing, and I was actively moving my shadows and highlights around in the can, and then in the dark room, and, you know, by no means was I any Ansel Adams, but, you know, Ansel Adams was the HDR. He was an HDR guy. He didn't tone map like Eustace said. It's not that kind. You're not getting black clouds and halos around mountaintops and that sort of thing. But when you shoot consciously and develop your image consciously to get things that are not possible with a straight shot, you know, with a film or even a digital camera that can only get a few stops of range. When you actively make it so that your final product can display those ranges, that's not, you can, like, there's evil HDR, and there's good HDR. It's just a way of getting the picture the way you want it. And if you can learn the tools and learn how to shoot it and develop it to get that look, then call it whatever you want. you know, my HDR usually doesn't look HDR.
Okay, I'm going to go on to Chris's shot.
Listen to a lot of you guys. I think I've done most everything wrong.
There's no wrong. There's just different.
I know it's art, right? It's art.
Right.
It's art. That's it.
You know, I've done some of the same things like with Steve. He kind of did the 3 processes. And when I first looked at this picture, I mean, it was from a library, which made me think of different things. And it was an older building, you know, and so I kind of got the idea that, well, it should be black and white, you know. And then, you know, if I kind of tinted a little bit on the yellow, it looks like aged, you know, paper, that kind of thing. It's what I was going for. And I love the ceiling in this, so I wanted to get a real good contrast going. So what I did is I pulled it into Lightroom. I come from a background, man. I've only got Lightroom and a couple other programs for the last like 2 or 3 months now. Before that, I did everything in Picasa, you know, and free program there, and Google puts it out. And so anyway, so I pulled it into Lightroom, and I did the HDR thing with it. I exported one as a JPEG and just regular as it was. Bumped it up a couple stops, did another one, down a couple stops, did another one, and then pulled those 3 into Photometrics Pro and processed them in there as an HDR in order to bring out the contrast in it. And when I got that, I kind of went down. They got their little presets, if that's what you call them, down there on the side, and I found the black and white, and the one that I liked the most, processed it on that. I made a few little adjustments on it and stuff, and processed it on that. Brought it back into Lightroom, and I made a few adjustments in Lightroom. I mean, not an awful lot. I did a lens correction on it, and what I do is I think Alan or somebody's mentioned earlier about the holding down your Option key and using some of the sliders. And one of the things that I do is I take the highlights and I move it all the way down to where there's no highlights on the slider. And I take the shadows, move it all the way up to where there's no shadows. And I hold the Option key down and I adjust my whites and my blacks. You know, take the whites up to where they just start to show, take the blacks down to where they just start to show. And that's usually where it kind of looks good to me at that point. And then I exported it. And it was a basic black and white. I mean, it had the high contrast in it and stuff. And but when I exported it, I still wanted to get that yellow tint to it, and I don't know how to do that in Lightroom or anything. I mean, you can probably do it, but I don't know how to do it. And so then I pulled it back into Picasa. And in Picasa, I forget where you're at in there, but you can actually change the whole tone, the color of the whole image. And some of the presets, I mean, they're all to certain things, but you can click on the color map on it and actually pick whichever color you'd like, and then you can slide it up and down to get the more intense color or the lighter color. And so I kind of went with just a tint of a yellow in it. It's kind of what I was looking for. But this is what I ended up with, and that's how I did it.
When I look at this picture, it looks to me, that second right before, when you're watching an old black and white movie that's running on a reel, that second right before the light, when the film is burned, before the film burns, when it gets really bright, it's just all the highlights, even the areas that are. I'm pointing at the screen like you guys can see what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Even
I've been doing that all day.
White highlights are so bright that it looks like it's being like burned out from the back. I like it. It's got it has a feel to it. It's not as humble as you sound. It's got it actually has a feel that's intentional and neat. And I like it. It just reminds me of that second before the bubble happens.
Totally can see that. It's or like when a nuclear bomb goes off and you get that flash.
Just before everything vaporizes, yeah.
Before everything vaporizes. But what's interesting to me, I'm looking at the top edge, around the arch. And what starts to happen, and it's almost something I wanna start looking at again. I'm gonna, this always gives me some inspiration. It almost looks like arch is softer, and the elaborate roof behind it is so detailed that it sort of pushes that softness. And there's something really interesting going on in that extreme. At least as I'm seeing it. I mean, it may be totally unintentional, but I would love to see that outer perimeter of the forwardmost arch and the top softened even more.
Well, I was trying to get the ceiling. I just love that ceiling, the pattern and the detail, and so I was really, I mean, that's kind of where my focus was on everything I was looking at. I always looked at the ceiling. Where are we at with the ceiling, and yeah, the walls, I guess they're about ready to, flash into flames here or something. But anyway, it was a fun project to do. I enjoyed it.
I'm going to run on. We've got two more, and they're both Ricardo's, and he's not here. So we don't have the benefit of his, his wisdom on him. He went more of an orange route with this one.
Yeah, extra warmth there, and there's a lot more detail through that window than I thought I saw in the original file. He did some stuff there.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's in the original file. I think he might have replaced it.
Well, it's pretty close. I tried to pull out that window initially, too. And I didn't get that much detail out of it, but he at least worked with what was there.
Yeah, but that would be, for anyone who's paying attention, that would be like sort of a couple of duplicate layers on multiply, so that you just keep, enhancing the light detail, and it's almost like layers building onto itself.
Yeah, that's some pretty intricate masking back there to make sure those light globes don't suffer the same, or suffer, but don't get caught up in that same multiply effect.
Yep. But simple to do with the new Refine Edge tool, and the masking that you can do. So. And here he went the other extreme. Well, still warm, but more sepia.
It looks similar to yours a little bit, Chris.
Yeah.
See, he went from caramel to milk chocolate. I'm disappointed in Ricardo. I was hoping for some dark chocolate. I mean, he talks. Where's the dark chocolate love? I'm not seeing it.
Maybe the next one he does, he'll go back.
Go back and forth fast enough, maybe he'll... Anyway, I think all of these turned out great. And the range that we've seen and what can be done with one picture is fantastic. I'm going to bring my own face back here.
I think Sam gets the Above and Beyond award for going.
Oh, definitely,
yeah.
That was really cool.
All right. Thank you all for it. And I've got my own face on my screen, and it's very distracting.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Alan, post the before and afters on our stream, and as long as we credit you with the original.
I'm sorry, I can barely hear you again, Sam.
Can we post before and afters?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We credit you. I just want to make sure you're okay.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
If you want, if you guys want to do this and it's all right with Alan, just send them to me and I'll make one photo album with everybody's, whatever you want to put up befores and afters or whatever in it.
Well, you can do it individually, you can do it collectively, you can do both. It doesn't matter to me. Just
if you'd like me to make one, put yours in an album with everybody's, just send them to me.
So you should have all of them already, Ken, right? I mean, you can.
I have your original and their afters, but if they want to put any mid steps or anything in it, then send those to me.
I'll probably write my own post about that.
That's fine.
And the other question, Ken, is this Hangout on air, is it going to be posted to YouTube or somewhere that it can be accessed later on?
I'm going to have to work with Alan on that because I had a little technical problem getting it started, but
it will be on my YouTube account, and I will share the link. As soon as we're off, I'll send it to Ken, and so it'll be live as soon as we're done. We don't really need to trim or anything. There's no editing involved.
I'll post the link everywhere.
Right. So.
And I'll do this again. I plan on doing this again sometime after the holidays. I will make sure that everything works technically before I start it. But if you and anybody watching has any comments, suggestions, or anything, please post them to the comments for this video, or send them to me directly. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And with that, if there's no more, are there any more questions? Any more comments anyone wants to make?
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, great idea, Ken.
Thanks.
Experience.
It would have been nothing without you guys. So thanks for volunteering, and thanks for being here.
This was fun, and everybody said thank you, and it was nice to hang out with you guys. Kind of meet y'all.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll do it again.
All right.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
See ya.
Bye.